Our first speaker is Jenny Chang, an independent writer, brand strategist, and cultural theorist known in the strategy community for her PowerPoint essays deconstructing pop culture phenomena and translating them into compelling, culturally fluent narratives. Her work aims to make both pop culture and academic analysis more accessible and improve media literacy around internet culture. Give it up for Jenny Chang.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much to Digital Void for having me back for the last show of the year. I love the idea of building a better internet because, and what I find really intriguing about that is that it's something we can all agree that we need to do and that we need to build, and there hasn't been a ton of investment around actually making that happen. So obviously, they brought that problem to us to solve. But in addition to being an internet gremlin, former journalist, and middle-aged millennial, I'm also a brand strategist. And I used to say that I got into that because it was the closest I could get to behavioral psychology without actually going to med school. And so now I'm here to talk about how the human components of building a better internet work. So how human behavior shapes the internet and why that matters. So I'd like to start with this quote from Wired's relaunch manifesto launched last year. "You cannot explain the impacts of technology on the world without deeply understanding the motives, incentives, and limitations of the people who build and use it." And this is what the internet is about in a nutshell. So we're often encouraged to think about the internet as this abstract thing that has kind of gained this inexplicable sentience and just run away with it. But it's more comparable to Frankenstein's monster in that it represents all of our very human fears, flaws, and desires. So what I'm proposing is a rehumanization of the internet. And this is not a new concept, but I do think we need to seriously study the ways in which this is actually possible, because right now we are at the mercy of platforms and the billionaires that have made them. And there's a word for this, coined by blogger, journalist, and digital activist Cory Doctorow. It's called enshittification, which is basically referring to the inevitable life cycle of a platform under capitalism. So first, it creates something good for users. So think about like Uber and Amazon. And then it dangles those users in front of business customers to lure them to join, like advertisers and suppliers, and this is called network effects. And then they do everything they can to make a profit at all costs at the expense of both users and business customers. So think like Uber passengers and Uber drivers, which basically makes the experience terrible for everyone. So Doctorow said in a podcast interview that companies that don't fear losing your business know that they can treat you worse. So how do we rehumanize the internet? And I think part of this is going to be reframing what user-friendly looks like. So we interpret user-friendly to mean easy to use. And if we look at the past 20-ish years of technological development, it all orients towards seamlessness and intuitive design. And because that's, in theory, that's what makes products easier to use. So this philosophy created an entire discipline, and it's called UI/UX design, or user interface, user experience design. And the goal of intuitive design is to guide people through the experience as seamlessly as possible. And that can be detrimental to our critical thinking and media literacy skills. So let's use the example of one of the building blocks of internet usage, which is Google. So remember, Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And its core product is Google Search. So Google search results used to look like this on the right. So you can see it's much more user-friendly. There is, Google search used to look like this. This is a screenshot from 2000. And you'd have a couple sponsored ads at the top, and then you would have to do the work of combing through a bunch of results to get to the information you wanted. You would have to cross-reference. You would have to really like understand that all this information may not be accurate, and that you have to kind of corroborate stuff to make sure that you're getting the right answer. Or you could use the "I'm feeling lucky" button, but that was always kind of a joke. The real process of Googling was combing through all this information and being able to verify it. So now Google looks like this on the right. And you can see that it's much more user-friendly. There are the frequently asked questions box, and then the Google curated summary of whatever you're looking up. And this makes finding answers a lot easier, but this can also be a lot more limiting, because Googling in its original form, like being able to find the right keywords and the right phrasing, is an art form. And it's part of the due diligence of doing good research, but when this information is already gathered for you, it's encouraging you to stay on that first page of results. And now Google has something called featured snippets, where the answer to your question will show up in big text above the rest of the search results. So in its own words, Google's featured snippets are displayed when its systems determine this format will help more people easily discover what they're seeking. And these are chosen automatically by keywords. But these answers are not pulled from Google's database of objectively correct information. They're pulled from the top search result, which is essentially I'm feeling lucky without you actually agreeing to that. And those answers have the potential to be very wrong. For example, if you Google how many ounces in a cup, it will automatically show you the liquid conversion. But if you're measuring dry ingredients, it's almost half that. And I can tell you as somebody who bakes that makes a drastic difference. And to be clear, I'm not saying that things are too easy. I'm not saying kids these days have it too easy. I don't think things should be difficult for no reason. But ease can also be a double-edged sword. So if you're a millennial or a Gen Xer, you remember the process of downloading music from LimeWire was like defusing a bomb that could potentially destroy your computer. So you had to know which download button was the real one. You had to know how to use Control-Alt-Delete. And now MacBooks are designed to be so user-friendly and so intuitive that they have antivirus software built in, unlike some older PCs. So getting a virus is a lot rarer now. But on the downside of that is that if there's a problem, a lot of people don't know how to troubleshoot, and they'll just ship their laptop off to the Genius Bar. And the more we outsource that labor to experts, the less power we have, because that knowledge is power. So Richard Shotton, who is arguably the most famous behavioral science marketer, gave a masterclass in behavioral economics last year in which he said, most people assume the way to change behavior is to change people's motivation levels. But more important is friction. You add friction if you want to deter behavior. You remove friction if you want to encourage it. So he used himself as an example, and he said that he doesn't keep chips in the house, and he'll make himself go to the store if he wants them, and that has reduced his intake. So we see intentional friction on the internet in things like email opt-outs and cookies agreements. And what they're trying to do is essentially manipulate you with design. They're making the opt-out text really small or grayed out, or hoping you'll just accept all cookies because it's easier, or because they use language that implies that you have no other choice. And there's a word for this kind of manipulation. It's called dark UX, or things that manipulate users into doing things that they originally didn't want to do. And friction is also used in urban planning, particularly to reduce car accidents. So TikToker The Happy Urbanist notes that when there's a lack of design, there's an over-reliance on signage and enforcement. So in other words, if you want to stop speeding, instead of installing speed limit signs, which a lot of people ignore, or policing, which is costly and inefficient, you should think about the user experience of the streets to facilitate safer driving practices. So this street in London was originally straight, as you can see in the picture from 2018, but the next year they installed a small block that made it a little bit angled, so forcing drivers to navigate around it and reduce their speed. And now in 2023, they've completely redone the street to make it narrower and more curved, which increases sidewalk space for pedestrians and naturally reduces driving speed. So it makes it safer for everyone. And similarly, since 2016, the state of Indiana has installed 256 roundabouts to replace traffic lights. And this has resulted in a 90% reduction in fatalities, 76% fewer injuries, and a 30 to 40% drop in accidents involving pedestrians. It has also reduced traffic delays, air pollution, and construction costs, and increased road capacity and enhanced area beauty. So what does this have to do with the internet? So I think we can apply these principles to building a better internet. We can use friction to encourage more thoughtful interactions, and it's likely that other benefits will follow. So one of the hallmarks of a toxic internet is toxic comments. Avatars encourage dehumanization, and they make it easier to forget that there are real people or cats with complex emotions and feelings behind these accounts and that we're interacting with. And so when I was in 6th grade, I volunteered in a 2nd grade classroom, and the teacher had this poster on the wall. And while I don't think the poster writer predicted that the state of the internet would be what it is today, I do think that this can still be applied to interactions on the internet. I do think that installing these kinds of roadblocks or on things like posting or commenting adding just like a small amount of friction, like pushing an extra button or having to log in, can help you take a step back and really evaluate the importance of your actions. So TikTok has tried instituting these kinds of roadblocks. It announced its Rethink feature back in 2021 to help promote kindness on the platform. And it asks users to reconsider their post if they think it may violate community guidelines. And it allows them to edit before posting. And it more recently rolled out informational badges that direct users to the TikTok Help Center. And it's the same principle in that people who really want to post hate comments will do so anyway. That's not the point. The point is to kind of take you out of this lizard brain headspace that makes you reactive, sometimes uncharacteristically so. Like a roundabout, it might feel silly and useless in the moment, but that half second can make a difference between you making a mistake that you might regret. And trolls on the internet may not deserve your sympathy necessarily, but they probably deserve the half second of consideration at the very least. Another problem is misinformation and disinformation. And if you don't know the difference, disinformation is intentional and malicious. So when we talk about these things, we have to understand that these are features, not bugs of the internet, and that we've seen the devastating effects of things like disinformation around elections and misinformation around COVID and vaccines. And it's not so much about preventing it because it's kind of inevitable, but we have to learn how to navigate it and mitigate the effects. So platforms like WhatsApp are sources of rampant misinformation, and anyone who has been subjected to Chinese meme chainmails can attest to this. But back in 2019, the New York Times Interpreter newsletter investigated this more closely in Brazil and found that because data was so expensive, WhatsApp kind of served as a workaround for articles and videos that would have otherwise been inaccessible. And due to a combination of widespread illiteracy and the fact that all of this information was widely available and easily shareable, but difficult to verify, misinformation ran wild. They just receive information, they read it, and they pass it along, one resident said. That's how it works, because it's too expensive to make a Google search. And this is why access to information is so important, because obviously newspapers have to pay their journalists, but when things like COVID are happening, we need to push for that information to be freely available. So during the 2020 election cycle, Nathan J. Robinson of Current Affairs wrote a piece called "The Truth is Paywalled, but the Lies Are Free," in which he proposed a universal knowledge access system, kind of like a universal healthcare system where the doctors get paid without users being charged for it. But this, of course, necessitates a massive amount of cooperation, and it necessitates an agreement that the product is a public good and should not be commodified, which is why we still don't have universal healthcare here. And there have been plenty of attempts to curb the spread of misinformation and disinformation with fact-checking on platforms like pre-Musk Twitter and even on cable news during the 2016 election cycle, but that essentially still relies on human moderators trying to clean up a mess that has already been created. So again, friction may be the answer. Twitter launched prompts for quote tweets back in 2021, encouraging users to actually read the article before sharing it, and which tech journalists called a speed bump. But given that only 40% of people read past the headline, a speed bump may be all that we need. So the rehumanization of the internet is especially pertinent as we grapple with the consequences of the attention economy, as we watch a genocide and other global events play out on TikTok, and as misinformation and disinformation are easily construed as fact. So I said earlier that we should reinterpret the term user-friendly. And what that means is building a human-centric internet and valuing people over profits. And so instead of taking user-friendly to mean easy for users, why not make it good for users? So friction can't solve everything, but it can ensure that we are not amplifying our worst impulses and kind of give us that chance to return to our human brains rather than our lizard brains. So we have to advocate for our humanity because it has been proven time and time again that we should not rely on corporations and that we cannot rely on our government to decide what that is worth. So to start, if you think your devices are listening to you, privacy tech worker Robert G. Reeve advised in a viral Twitter thread back in 2021, block the fuck out of every app's ads. It's not just about you. Your data reshapes the internet. The internet is never going to be the wacky place it was when I had a live journal and people shared protein gifts in the form of YTMNDs. Big business has come to suck the joy and your dollars out of it, so at least make it hard for them. We cannot forget that there is power in the collective and that we have to be playing an active role in creating the world and the internet that we want to see. And so much of building a better internet is not going to be about policy. It's going to be about encouraging pro-social behaviors that create a community that we actually want to be a part of. And that does take more work, but I think that that work is ultimately worth it. And if you ever feel hopeless, never forget that we once bullied a multi-billion-dollar movie corporation into reanimating the entirety of Sonic the Hedgehog in just 1 year, because organizing works. Thank you.